Logging. Let's take a look at how we can access the log files of a DataMiner system and also take a look at some logging of the DataMiner Cube application. So within the logging module, we will first go through a quick introduction and then dive into the logging of the Cube application first of all, combined a little bit with the communication logging, which is basically the communication coming in and out of our DataMiner Cube. And then probably the most interesting part is going to be accessing the DataMiner log files. If you want to troubleshoot something or if you want to go a little bit more in depth on certain modules, you can go there. And also the element logging, which is going to be logging specifically for one element in my DataMiner system. When, for instance, we're developing a driver, we might want to take a look at that. And wrap it up with the limitation we can set on the log file size. So the logging module, we can find that in System Center once more. So if I maybe open up immediately my DataMiner Cube, we're still connected to dcp.skyline.be. So maybe I can visualize our cluster name there. So we are connected over there. If we want to access the logging, we need to click on the user icon and go to System Center. Within System Center, we will find here the logging section, which will give us a page with 4 tab pages. And that's basically the 4 different sections that I will go through: the cube logging, communication, DataMiner, and element-specific log files. So typically you want to go there if you want to troubleshoot something, if you're developing a driver, if you have some automation script that is outputting some logging into that file. That's typically the cases where you want to go to that logging module. But first we have some cube logging. So if we focus first on the first tab page we have here, the cube logging is basically logging from your cube application. So when it's trying to connect to the system, when it's fetching the initial data, how long did it take? You can see already here like the cube load times with some more details at the bottom of how much time it took to fetch the information from your DataMiner system and load the UI, but also while it's running, if it needs to load specific Visio files, a Visio file might maybe output some logging there if certain things were not visually rendering correctly, for instance. So what do we find there? There's an option to show debug logging as well. If you want to have some more details, you can easily filter there as well, search within the list, which is going to be longer and longer as long as your cube stays open for a longer amount of time. And when you select one record, you basically have the details at the bottom, and you can also open up the details by clicking on the open button or double clicking on the records. At the bottom, we do have some options to easily export the information, also immediately email that exported data, open the folder where the log files are located, and do some copying of the summary cube information to easily, for instance, email that to somebody else. Now, going into the second tab page, we do have the communication there, and that's still related to Cube, you could say, because that's the communication between the DataMiner system and your Cube client. So your client, not towards the elements or other clients or anything like that. So it's just between your application and the server, where you can basically see all the messages going back and forward. In this case, you see a lot of received items. So those are like alarm updates or element states. An element going into critical state would be popping up here, but also changes that are happening in your DataMiner system will continuously come in there. So you can also freeze that, filter that, and the available buttons at the bottom are again the same thing. So let's have a quick look at that. So we do see on the first page our cube load times indeed with the details there. We see where it's connected to, the IP address of the server that I'm connected to. So I'm connected through the internal network, not the external network. So these kind of details are in there. So you can easily email that, export that, copy that with using the buttons at the bottom. If you want to open up, for instance, the load times, you can see the same details, of course, with some more information there as well. Communication, so typically we will see a whole series of informations continuously coming in. So whenever alarms are happening, they will also be passing by in this stream of data, you could say. So some of them are also being sent towards the system. So if we would load a driver, or if we would change a subscription to get the changes of a specific element, all these kind of things would be sent to the system and we receive information. That's the difference between the sent and received we have there. So that's the kube specific logging. If we then move to the DataMiner logging, that's a quite interesting one, because right from our client, we can immediately access all the log files from the DataMiner system. So if you have multiple DataMiner agents or nodes in your system, you will find several sections, collapsible panels, you could say, with the names of the DataMiner agents in there. So you could have like 5 or 10 agents in there, depending on how big your system is. Underneath the name of your DataMiner agent, you will find for that DataMiner agent all the specific log files. So basically every module in the DataMiner system has its own log file, like SL DataMiner, SL Element, SL Protocol, SL Automation, SL Correlation. All these kind of different modules will have their own log file. You do have the possibility to sort it alphabetically or according to the log level by using this button here, A to Z, or 1 to level up, level down. If you click on there, what's the level? It's indicated next to the name of the modular log file. It's all on 0 here, which is good. That's basically that there is no logging or a minimum of logging defined. But you could increase the log level so that more information would be added there, so that you can easily sort on that to see which log files are generating more logging. The default is basically to change the log level for all of them. I'll come back to that when I look at this collapsible panel here. So let me go back one slide. So by default, this panel is collapsed. You need to click on there to open it up, and there you can change that log level. So you can select a specific module, like the DataMiner core executable, which log level you want for information, for debug, and for error messages. You can change it from no logging to level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to development logging. I do immediately want to point out the last note here on the slide is be careful with the higher levels of logging, because that can generate a massive amount of information. It's not going to fill up your data, your hard disk space, because that is going to be limited, the size of the files. I'll come back to that. But actually the text formatting, creating all that text, is consuming a lot of CPU utilization, and then writing it to the disk will consume a lot of disk utilization, or disk busy time, you could say. So if you don't have anything special to investigate, it's recommended to leave this always on 0. Basically no logging. It says no logging, but that's a minimum of logging that is going to be generated. So if you want to change that, you can change that to, for instance, log everything. Click on the apply levels and it will be applied for one module, or if you change the default, it will be changed for every log file. Now, there are two ones that I will immediately show and give you a little bit more details on. That's the errors and the Watchdog, because those are not, those are two special cases. The errors are basically a consolidation of all the error messages that are being found in the other modules. So instead of going through all the log files to figure out where there are any error messages, you can go to the errors log file and find everything consolidated into one file there. Next to that, we have the Watchdog, and the Watchdog is basically a special process that is residing on the DataMiner agent, which will take a look if all the other processes are still doing their job correctly. And even within those processes, if all the threads are still doing their job. So basically how it works is that every process and every thread in those in the DataMiner agent needs to on a regular basis report back to the Watchdog to say that it's still doing its job. If for one or another reason there is a process or a thread within a process which is not reporting back within 15 minutes, that's the default time, within 15 minutes, you will basically have like what we call a runtime error within the DataMiner system. And it will indicate something like runtime error. The protocol thread for this element, for instance, is not responding anymore. So those are the runtime errors, are basically the error messages which are generated by the Watchdog, and the Watchdog file will also contain more information about those runtime errors, when they started, or maybe when they initially started and maybe disappeared and things like that. What I do also want to mention is that those runtime errors, they can actually happen also on lengthy operations. So if all of a sudden the database would become very slow and it would take a very long time to do certain queries, it would be possible that you get a runtime error and that it would disappear again. Same thing for doing lengthy operations on specific elements. Typically we need to avoid that, or we should be able to avoid that. But I just want to give you a heads up that it is possible that certain runtime errors are disappearing because basically lengthy operations were happening there. And also note that every log file, when you restart a DataMiner agent, every log file is starting all over with a brand new one. If you want to go back to the previous one, from the previous runtime before the restart of your DataMiner agent, you can always right click and say open previous. Then you basically load the one from the previous runtime before the last restarts. Let's take a look at that. So on the DataMiner tab page, we only have one DataMiner agent in our system. So we can open up this DataMiner agent and see the specific log files for that agent. I do immediately see that it's all on 6. So basically the logging has maybe been a little bit too much. Let me immediately put it on no logging and apply that. I did it on the default, so now everybody is following the default. It is possible, if you take, for instance, SL DataMiner, that you say like, okay, I'm going to override this one and put this one on level 3, for instance, to get a little bit more detail and apply it on this one. So now this one is not following with a grayed out font, the default, but it actually has its own limits there. So since it was actually on development logging, it has a lot of calls coming in and out, and basically you would probably see that you don't have a lot of logging in there. Note, you can also go for view page source and then have it open in a notepad. You would actually see that the log file, if I take a look, this is 2 o'clock, 9 minutes and 2 o'clock. At the end, it's still 9 minutes and 2 o'clock. Well, actually, it's writing in there. And when it reaches the end, the limit of the size that is specified in your DataMiner system, it starts writing again at the top. And then somewhere, maybe it's now in the middle of the file writing, I don't know where. Well, actually, if you do a search for a series of stars, like 5, 6 stars, and if you find this, you will see that we have here a separator, which basically means that here we have the current time, or almost the current time since I opened it. So we have like 15 minutes of logging from 2 o'clock and 4 minutes up to 2 o'clock and 21 minutes. So we have like 16 minutes of logging in there. So you can see that's a lot of logging that we're generating with those higher levels. Now it should definitely slow down. So you will find a log file for DataMiner for all the different components like correlation or automation. So if you're, for instance, running an automation script, you can also generate certain logging in the different steps. So if you have a lengthy automation scripts at different points in time, you can say like, or different points in your script, you can generate information messages in your alarm console, but also log lines in this log file. So you can then track back here if maybe there was something taking a little bit longer than expected there. As I mentioned, two items are of interest. That's the error log files. So apparently we have an LDAP error which is continuously repeating here. And that's basically a consolidation of the different log files. So in the Active Directory, we would actually see those same error messages again as well. And the Watchdog, as I was mentioning as well. So in the Watchdog, there you will see DataMiner is starting, and there will be a whole series of threads from different processes like SL element and SL protocol, which are registering, which are adding the threads at startup. So it was starting up a couple of or a week ago. And then basically, if there would be any problems, it does some reporting as well. You would see here you have something like a half open RTE runtime error, but it cleared again. So there was apparently a long operation here, but it didn't go into a full error message. So after 7 minutes, it already detected something which was taking a little bit longer than expected, but it never reached the 15 minutes, so it never actually generated a full runtime error, which would appear then in my alarm console as an error message. So those are two examples of error messages. This is just an error message about an Elasticsearch, which is not existing on this system. So we don't need to worry about that. We don't need that on this system. The licensing should be adapted. So we can ignore this one, but this is a kind of error message you would see, but then with a DataMiner runtime error that, for instance, a thread like this one is not responding the notification thread, for instance, in SLDMS. Okay, so that's a little bit on the DataMiner log files. And of course, as I mentioned, you can right-click on any of them, like for instance the Watchdog, and open the previous one, and then it would you can see already from the 13th instead of the 21st. That's the one from a week older, where we did a restart as well. Okay, that's DataMiner specific modules, but of course when I'm adding elements on my DataMiner system, and specifically when I would be, for instance, developing drivers, it would be interesting to see a little bit more information about which packets are coming in, or which calculations are failing, or maybe some quick actions are doing some weird things, or I generated some logging in my driver and I want to further investigate that. So therefore you can go to the Elements tab page, and you will find all the elements there. You can just select a specific element and see the log file there. So again, you can sort by the alphabetical or the level up, level down. And again, you can change the log settings to configure which logging you want to activate for this specific element. This is always specifically for one element. So if you're developing a driver, you have a test element, you go there and you can see some more information about what your driver is doing there. Again, the same note, be careful. Typically you want to leave everything on 0 on a production system, but if you're developing, you might want to bump that up to the log everything, or the even maybe development logging, which would generate a lot of the communication as well. So maybe show that as well, because there's also a convenient shortcut. If you can go to the elements and you can search for your element in this list. But if I just close this and I'm developing on this driver here, I have this test element here. You can actually right click on there and you can go to View Log. and there it will immediately open up the system center, going to the elements page and selecting this specific element, showing me here all the details where it is basically loading the element, loading the protocol, all the parameters, and start doing the polling and things like that. This is no logging, it's just at start. You can see it's no logging. So it's just at startup generating a couple of basic things, and then it would typically not generate a lot of things anymore while it is continuously polling. If you would activate a higher level, that would generate, of course, a massive amount of information. I say massive amount of information, so we have to be careful with the hard disk space. So that's why every log file in the DataMiner system is limited in size. You can go to System Center, Logging, and you can change the file size there. Let's check on our system here, System Settings, the Logging, and it is actually on our system on 3 megabytes. So each log file has a maximum size of 3 megabytes. Of course, we could have a large amount of elements on there, and we have a large amount of modules as well. So it could still be more than a gigabyte of logging that we are generating, of course, especially if you go for the higher log levels. But it is limited. And as I mentioned, whenever we reach that 10 megabytes or the 3 megabytes, the logging will basically start again at the top in the same log file and overwrite everything which is already in there. You can find where we are with the whole series of stars. If you find that one, that's the wraparound point where we are. So that's logging, a simple module, but it allows you to quickly access not only the logging of the Cube application and the communication, but especially those log files from every DataMiner agent, from every module, and of course also for your elements if you would, for instance, be developing a driver. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one.